So we allow, the mod community and everything else. If it was all about profit for us, if it was all about, right, we're just going to sell more things and that's it. If that's what it was, we would cut mods out completely. We would have said, no, we don't support modding anymore. That's it. The game's not moddable. We lock all the code, and then we just sell all the
Infinity Waters.
Perhaps. I don't want to name any names, but yeah, we could have done that, but we didn't. We understand that modding is a major part of our community's life and everything else. So with the game's architecture is still very moddable. So people do create their own units, they create their own aspects of the game, new effect mods and everything else, and they plug those in. And we're happy to have that stuff done. It's not just about profit for us.
Okay, another point about Empire before we move on to Napoleon is diplomacy. I played various games and I was not happy with the diplomacy ones throughout all the game, because even when I played France and Spain was my historical and in-game long-time ally, he would attack me at some time. Why is that?
Okay, well, first off, the diplomatic behaviour is linked to the AI's general behaviour. So, in the sort of not the latest version, in anything prior to the latest patch, you'll find that the AI can be somewhat occasionally erratic. So you'll get things like that, where a long-standing ally will suddenly attack you.
Sometimes it's not erratic, as I would put it.
Well, sometimes it's passive, and you're like, okay, well, I want more out of it. What I would recommend, again, play Empire with the latest patch. You'll find that the diplomacy is much improved, not least because the AI behaviour is improved, so diplomacy is kind of an element of that and makes more sense. But in addition to that, the diplomatics have been overhauled. So you'll find that the AI will do much smarter.
In Empire 1.5,
that's correct. And most recent Steam patch, right? You'll find that the AI makes more realistic deals. It understands the value of things better, especially the value of things like regions and technology. And it will make deals based on what you're requesting from it.
So you're saying if I have an ally and I try to trade to this ally military stuff he could use, and until 1.5 he was neglecting me and pissing me off for wanting to help me in my battle, it's now
much more sensibly. Of course there'll be examples where it does act erratic and a bit bizarre, but you mustn't forget that occasionally the AI has another plan, right? So there will be occasions when you will ask for something it doesn't want to give, or you'll offer something which it doesn't want to take. So in some cases it will behave in a way that you'll go, oh, I don't know why it did that, right? But never assume that a sensible option for you is always a sensible option for the AI. That's not always the case. It has its own things it needs to think about. But in general terms and in general across the game, you will find that the AI is much more responsive with Empire in the most recent patch, especially with the diplomatics. And when we come on to Napoleon, we've made a lot of changes with the diplomatics.
So let's talk about Napoleon. You already mentioned that the AI will act differently in battles. We don't need to expand on that, I think. What about the campaign AI and how the campaign works?
Sure. Okay, so the first thing to reassure sort of your listeners is the level we've reached with the most recent Empire patch is the absolute baseline for Napoleon, right? So that's the least it will be. It will be better than that. It already is by a long margin. But in case anybody's worried about campaign performance or AI activity, please be assured that it's the absolute least is where we've got to with them. Much better and beyond that.
So we are not talking about some mini missions linked together and you call it a campaign, but it's still a campaign.
Each campaign map, towns and cities and objectives. The way that Napoleon works is when playing the narrative story, when playing as France and going through the story of Napoleon, the principal thing is you've got this overarching objective, right? So that'll be like your, destroy this city, key city, drive the Austrians out of northern Italy, right? But during that, you'll get lots of little sub-missions issued, which are, divert to this town or attack this region, or, protect your ally in doing this. And in doing those things, you unlock more of the story of Napoleon. Some of those things will be beneficial to your overall objectives. Some of them will sidetrack resources and attention, so you need to be careful. But in general, all of the missions are there to add flavour and experience to the game. So there's a much more of a kind of a directed feel to it, but with the same Total War sandbox that you're used to. You don't have to do any of this stuff, right? If you want to just follow the major mission arc, which is conquer this thing, do it however you want, that's fine. But if you want more of the TW experience and more of the Napoleon storyline, go for the missions as well.
I noticed when you presented the game a couple of minutes ago that you went into much more detail in presenting the map.
Yeah.
The scale is small, so you can do more of tactical stuff in there, like ridges and forests.
One of the big differences with Napoleon is that by having 3 separate campaign maps for the 3 separate periods that Napoleon kind of goes through militarily, you're able to kind of essentially put that map under a microscope so we can get all of the mountains and the valleys and the regions and everything else. You can use those things more tactically. You can circumvent regions completely, you can bowl right through them, you can seize key locations and ignore others. We're trying to get rid of that Total War chessboard feel. You just roll across an empty map, and you've got much more to do with mountains and passes and everything else. The idea there, as you said, is just to be much more strategic and to be more kind of I guess just more selective with your targets and your battles, and that's that's something we're very excited about. It looks good.
Does that translate into different battle maps too?
Yes, it does. The way that the battle maps work now is that we generate the battle maps automatically from topography, so from the actual campaign map and from the general location.
Well, that's the case since Rome, I think.
That's correct, yeah. But now we also add a kind of an art pass to all of these things. So they're all given essentially a treatment in terms of lighting and effects and geography to make them more interesting and more fun to play on. So as well as being realistic and accurate, as to a degree where they're relevant and playable, you also now have them, a bit more fun, a bit more looking more realistic. So that's the important point of Napoleon. We polished up the experience for the player, as well as keeping the realism for the strategist.
So you're going into more detail, graphic-wise, but also period-wise, I think. Yeah. But isn't there a danger in there too? Because Napoleon's successes were mostly based on the fact that he was organizing his campaigns and his armies in a totally different way, that France was mobilizing its people, which was not happening across Europe. It was still a professional
the conscription system, the corps system,
the army, where you had corps which were consisting of all the elements of a larger army, self-sufficient units. How can you translate that into a game where you can still have an AI and different nations being able to compete?
Okay, right, so...
Or do you try to do that at all?
Yes, we do. First off, the technology tree, the research and development tree, reflects all of these changes. So the core system, things like pressing members of your public into service, conscription, things like that, all of those are unlockable technologies, social and military, that you go through during the game.
But for the other nations?
For the other nations too. So what's important is that...
Sorry for interrupting you all the time, but is it harder for them than for Napoleon?
It is and it isn't. In certain cases, certain nations, obviously as with any other nation, they start with certain things and not others. So France, may necessarily start in let's say the Grand European campaign, will start with certain technologies already unlocked, and other nations will start with others. What's important to realise is that Napoleon, a bit like the Marius reforms in Rome, like Napoleon kind of instituted all these reforms and changes, and initially was incredibly successful as a result. But by the time he gets to his latter European campaigns, the European powers are beginning to catch up. So when we're talking about the Grand European campaign, the rest of Europe is starting to understand Napoleon's tactics. I mean, it was famously said, you mustn't fight an enemy too long, otherwise they learn all of your abilities and techniques. And this is becoming true of Europe. There have been several alliances against Napoleon, and he fought many battles against, the major powers, especially the Austrians. And by the latter period, by the final Grand European campaign, the other campaign nations have access to these things and can research and develop them because they've seen them. They've seen them all in use. They've seen them all being used by the French army now for decades. And so in that respect, it's quite realistic to have those technologies for those nations. So we're still in the stage of balancing who gets what to begin with. But rest assured that France will be militarily and economically certainly one of the most aggressive and powerful nations in Europe, whether playing as it or against it. But equally, the Allies have a chance, depending on the right routes.
And the Allies can be played by the player too?
Yes.
Last question. Napoleon is famous for his battles, for his victories, but also for the tragic end at Waterloo.
Yes.
Now, Waterloo doesn't seem to make sense in a campaign kind of game because it was a very special battle resulting from many decisions in the 100 days before. Is Waterloo in the game? Will you play it as a finale to the campaign, as a set-piece battle?
Yes.
Or how do you deal with that?
So the way that Waterloo works is that, of course, being a Total War game, at the end of the Grand European campaign, you may have completely changed all that. You may have changed all of history, and Waterloo could never happen. However, we unlock it as a battle that you can play, if you wish, as the culmination of the story, the culmination of the campaign has actually happened. So yes, you can play Waterloo, the actual set-piece battle of Waterloo. You can play that in two ways. One, on the historical battles timeline. That's completely separate from the campaigns. You can just play through Napoleon's battles in sequence, culminating in Waterloo. Separately, you play through your 3 major campaigns, you finish the Grand European campaign, and if you wish, you then go on to play Waterloo, and Waterloo is essentially you know, the culmination of all that. You get to finally play as France in Waterloo. Can you win this engagement? You know, and then obviously change history dramatically as a result.
Can you? Because it was quite impossible, I think.
I wouldn't say it was impossible. Napoleon never believed it was impossible. You know, there were 2 or 3 moments in the battle where potentially it could have gone either way. If 2 or 3 things had happened differently, just with any battle in history, Napoleon may well have won. Of course, I find it difficult to say that as a Brit, but no, in real terms, there were several key moments in the battle where it would have been possible, given the right tactics, you know, and of course it's debated historically and militarily whether Napoleon could have done this. But I guess the best way to put it is, if anyone could have done it, Napoleon could.
That's a good ending.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Cheers. Cool.